Okay, it's been a wonderful morning. There's been excitement, there's been buzz. People are really enjoying themselves. We actually have more people here in the morning than we've ever had before. We'll give you statistics later on, but as of 10 a.m., 2,700 of you had already picked up your credentials, which is really amazing because you're here to have a great time. The Global Conference embodies the power of ideas. And the inspiration that you pick up here, the ideas that you pick up here, are going to be the change that helps to move the world forward. Hopefully, by the time the 3 days are done, you will be looking at the world through a slightly different set of eyes. You're going to see that we have this year a special focus on issues relevant to women and girls. You'll see that reflected in the topics we address, the faces around you, and also the commitment in my letter that's in the new Milken Institute review that's in your conference bags, but also in the op-ed in today's Wall Street Journal by our chairman, Mike Milken, and Bloomberg's chairman, Peter Grauer. We set a very ambitious goal for us, given where we started from, of having approximately 30% women speakers this year, and I'm delighted to say that we made it. And our percentage of women attendees is also just short of 30%, which is also terrific. Now, the Global Conference covers a great many things beyond the areas in which you may be personally familiar. So we urge you to indulge yourself, go to sessions in areas that you don't have anything to do with in your day-to-day life, and see what new ideas and inspirations you have that you can take back with you to your own work, to your families. So please indulge and do that. Now, one of the great things about the conference is that it's pulsing with innovation, energy, and excitement. And that makes it very fitting that we have with us the mayor, Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, because while Los Angeles is not technically the home of the Beverly Hilton, we all know that this is Los Angeles. And somebody who embodies that is Eric Garcetti, the 42nd mayor of LA. Before becoming mayor, he was president of the LA City Council for 4 terms. He's a graduate of Columbia University, a Rhodes Scholar, and a 4th-generation Angelino, as well as being a lieutenant in the U.S. Naval Reserve. So please join me in welcoming our great mayor, Eric Garcetti.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody, and it is such a joy to welcome you here to Los Angeles. It's only fitting that the finest gathering of the world's business, political, and thought leaders is happening here in the City of Angels. And Los Angeles is a city that's all about global connections. It is, by almost every measure, the most diverse collection of human beings ever assembled in one place on this earth. 39 countries with their largest population outside the home country, over 220 languages and 115 countries of origin. This is everybody's second home, and I hope that you feel the warmth and the hospitality of this town, but also its dynamism. We see this incredible connection here of the world, a place that can argue that we're the northern capital of Latin America, the eastern capital of the Pacific Rim, and the western capital of the United States. Combine that with our sunshine. If we didn't have a city here, we'd probably have to build one. But luckily, there is a Los Angeles, a place that you can enjoy in this time while you're here, America's most global city, and a vision of the world as it is today. And I think that though about global connections, we're about much more than just sunshine and our diversity. This is a city that is leading the way in terms of global thought and innovation. And the Milken Conference is the embodiment of that. Some solutions to our greatest challenges are being born right here in LA. Take in the medical field, where researchers working with stem cells are finding cures to blindness, to even AIDS and to heart disease. Take our space program, where companies like SpaceX are redefining public-private partnerships. Take our port, where companies like Cargomatic are using the same technology used by Uber to connect containers with truck drivers and to get them out of the port and to redefine logistics. This is a town with a creative hand, but one that redefines all the industries from Hollywood to the technology that we're seeing boom here. But it's also one with a big heart, and that's why I love this conference so much. This is a city that when something like Nepal happens, millions of dollars of aid and some of the best trained emergency rescuers in the world are deployed to Nepal right now from Los Angeles to help that country in its time of need. But besides having a creative hand, and a big heart, we're also a place that is investing big. I hope some of you flew into our brand new international terminal, the finest now in North America. We're underway doing that with 8 more terminals, $1 million a day at our port. And the largest public works program in the country right now are the 5 rail lines that are being built here, yes, in the car capital of America, transforming our relationship with transportation. And we hope that during this conference you have some time to get away, to go down to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art at a moment when Los Angeles is arguably the art capital of the world, and have something like a Korean short rib taco from a food truck in the town that invented the connection between food trucks, global cuisine, and Twitter all at once. This is a place that is constantly reinventing itself, a place that everybody is a star, and a place that I hope that you will come back to. Bottom line, I hope this is a place, too, that you will think about investing and visiting, working in. More people today live, work, study, and visit Los Angeles than ever in our history. We've got the most global flights that connect Asia with Latin America and vice versa, and this is a place where 2 things define us: our freedom and our creativity. Freedom to innovate and the creativity that brings people together across the sectors that we see reflected here today. So greetings from the City of Angels. This is a room full of angels here in LA, and I hope that you will come back to ensure that this city's strength reflects our world's strength, solving our most pressing challenges, ensuring that economic prosperity is in every corner of every city in this country and on earth, and making sure that innovation and creativity is the hallmark not just of a great conference, not just of a great city, but of a great and resurgent world as well. Have a great conference and enjoy Los Angeles. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. Well, there are here more than 3,500 attendees who are going to be here at the conference. We wish we could accommodate more than that, but that's the maximum that we can hold here. And those 3,500 attendees represent 55 countries and 41 states. And in fact, our attendance this year from non-US attendees is up by over 20% from last year. Now we have for you slightly more than 700 panelists, and nearly 80% of those panelists are new this year from last. Now there will have been some speaker changes with this many panelists. As you might imagine, things happen to people. They're sometimes unable to attend at the last minute, and we've added some new speakers. But all of that will be announced at the panels that you attend, so you'll hear from them there. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed panels do fill up quickly. The rooms are assigned based upon the sign-ups that all of you have done, and we try and do the best we can to allocate the rooms based on the number of people likely to be in there. But some will overfill, and if they do, please understand, go on to another panel because there are going to be seats everywhere. And if you can't see a panel, either because you couldn't get in or because you're unable to get into the 7 out of the 12 panels you'd like to attend at any time slot, you can view all of the panels online. They're available at our website, globalconference.org, or our homepage. And within, an hour to 2 hours of the time that the panels are done, they'll be up on the web. Now, in order to further enhance your global conference experience, for those of you who haven't, and 2/3 of you have, please download our app at MI Global. It has the program agenda, the speaker bios. For those of you who wanted to bring an extra attendee to carry the program because it was too heavy, you can see it all on the app. And it also will help you with social media experience, event notifications, new networking opportunities. So please download that app if you haven't. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank the hosts of some of the wonderful events that we held over the weekend. So I'd like to call out in particular Ron Burkle, Stephen and Alexandra Cohn, Larry Gagosian, Maisie Chan and Jeff Green, Guggenheim Partners, Steve Mnuchin, Michael Ovitz, Jeannie and Tony Pritzker, and Linda and Stuart Resnick, all of whom hosted events this weekend. Thank you very much. And again, a very special thank you to our underwriter, Guggenheim Partners. They've been so generous in helping us to make the global conference possible. We want to thank them, as well as our other sponsors, because we are a publicly supported nonprofit. This event raises funds that makes our work possible. We hope that all of you who are not yet members of the Milken Institute Associates will join and help us in keeping our work going year-round. We'd like to recognize and thank this year's conference sponsors because they do make this event possible. But before that, we want to tell you a little bit more about the Milken Institute and the great work that these sponsoring organizations are helping to support. So while you're eating, join me for a minute or two while we tell you a little bit about the Milken Institute and give our thanks to our sponsors.
We realize our mission every day through 8 centers, which produce independent, data-driven research, hold action-oriented meetings around the globe, and develop meaningful policy initiatives to effect change.
Our Washington, D.C.-based Center for Financial Markets steers the policy debate away from ideology and towards practical solutions.
Asia is the growth story of today. The Milken Institute Asia Center, based in Singapore, is building new relationships across sectors and around the region.
FasterCures works on research, process, and policy, public policy solutions to the challenges in medical research.
We do this throughout the year through events like Partnering for Cures, our TRAIN network, and our public policy work in Washington, D.C.
The Milken Institute produces research of very high quality, ideas intended to be put to use by policymakers in every country in this world.
The Best Cities for Successful Aging, I think, is a publication that is helpful for anybody who is concerned about how do I live my best life as I age.
The 2014 report ranks 352 metros across the United States for a series of characteristics that really represent the kind of city that we would all want to live in.
We publish year-round research. We work with centers to come up with their agenda, and then the agenda in action is really the convenings that we do, and I think that's what the Institute is best known for. The conferences, the invitation-only summits, or at our flagship event, which is our global conference here in LA every year.
Be prepared to be amazed.
Jam-packed rooms, fast-paced exchanges, big ideas.
You can turn to your left and there's a former British Prime Minister. You turn to your right and there's one of the Fortune 500 CEOs.
If we live in an interdependent world, we ought to be struggling for shared prosperity and shared responsibility. Remember, what works are creative networks of cooperation.
The Milken Institute's networks, our community, our events, and our centers that are now on multiple continents really have truly transformed us into a global organization.
We have come a long way. When our founder was still in college, he developed a formula. It states that prosperity is a result of the interaction of human capital, social capital, and financial capital. That formula is what guides us. It's our DNA. It always has been, and it always will be.
The Milken Institute wishes to thank our underwriter, sponsors, and media sponsors for their support. Without their generosity, our work and the global conference would not be possible. We thank our strategic partners for their significant annual support of the Milken Institute. Our underwriter, Guggenheim Partners. Our platinum sponsors, Apollo Global Management, Babson Capital Management, Diamond Resorts International, GAM, Jeffries, Sanofi. Our gold sponsors, AR Capital, RCS Capital, Beach Point, BlackBerry, Bombardier, Canyon Partners, Chevron, Citadel, Citi, Credit Suisse, Golden Tree Asset Management, Principal Financial Group, Providence Equity Benefit Street Partners, Schenkman Capital, Toyota. Our silver sponsors: Ardagh Group, Barron Capital Group, Broadridge Financial Solutions, CME Group, Deloitte, EY. Kennedy Wilson, Leonard Green and Partners, LiquidNet, Prudential Investment Management, Stone Canyon Industries, Winton. Our bronze sponsors: 21st Century Fox, AARP, Bank of California, Blue Harbor Group, Blue Mountain Capital Management, BMO Financial Group, Calamos Investments, Canada, Causeway Capital Management, Chatham Capital, CIM Group, CLSA, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, CQS, Crescent Capital Group, Deutsche Bank, EJF Capital, Fiji Water, Fitch Ratings, Fleischmann's Ingredients, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gensler, GLG, Goldman Sachs, Goodwin Procter, Herbalife Nutrition, Knowledge Universe, LW Partners, Mark Asset Management, Mayo Clinic, McGraw-Hill Financial, Mizuho Securities USA, Mondelez International, Moody's, Nielsen, PayPal, Pfizer, Point72 Asset Management, PSAM, Solaris Sports, Solus Alternative Asset Management, State Street, Symbion Power, TCW, Two Sigma, Vista Equity Partners, Weiss Multi-Strategy Advisors, WL Ross & Company. Our media sponsors: Bloomberg, The Financial Times, Wondros. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as I told you, this, of course, is going to be an exciting time for you. You're going to be overwhelmed with the stimulation. Most of you have been here all morning, been to different panels. Already your minds are reeling. They're going to be even more so by the end of the day. So we want to give you a little something at the end of the day to help you relax. So I just want to be sure you know about the very special late night program tonight we're doing. It's at 9 o'clock. It'll be in the Beverly Hills Ballroom. We're going to have David Foster and some surprise guests taking the stage for a wonderful evening of musical entertainment. But at the beginning of the evening, we're also going to have a very special program, a conversation between Mike Milken and legendary director and producer John Landis. And to give you a very brief taste of this, let me just show you a little excerpt from when Mike and John had a little conversation in connection with our London summit. So why don't we roll that?
When I did Thriller with Michael Jackson, Michael knew everybody. And the only time in my life I was ever been speechless, I mean literally at a loss for words, was about 3 in the morning one night. We're in downtown LA in Vernon, which was a dangerous gang area. Michael's assistant says, "John, Mike would like to see you." And I go, "Okay, tell him I'll be 15 minutes. And do you know what Winnebagos, those trailers, you step up into them. So I knocked on the door, knock, knock, Michael, and I stepped up into it, and as I come into it, Michael goes, "John, do you know Mrs. Onassis?" So I was like, I was really dumbstruck. It was like, what the fuck is Jackie Kennedy doing? I mean, it was like, it was amazing.
So, gives you a little taste of what you have in store for you that tonight, 9 o'clock in the Beverly Hills Ballroom. It will fill up, so please get there at 9 if you can, if you'd like to come, and we hope you'll join us for that. Okay, for those of you who have been to the conference before, and that's a great many of you, you know that we can't start the conference without a quiz question. To get you going, and to create dissension at your table as you disagree about the answers. So as we started last year, we've eliminated the voting devices, the formal ones, because what you have now as a voting device is in your pocket or your purse. It's your cell phone. So we usually tell you turn it off, do keep it on vibrate, but get it out for this. Because when you see the list of possible answers, you'll see next to each one a number code. Now you choose your answer and you text that code to 22333. It's that easy. Very simple. Even I can do it, which means it really is easy, okay? All right, so now we're gonna give you a question. We'll give you a little bit of time for you to discuss among yourselves. For those of you who are in the pavilion in the Beverly Hills Ballroom, this applies to you as well. Take out your phones. You can argue with your neighbors about what the right answer is. And here's the question. Okay, you're about to hear insights from 3 former US Treasury Secretaries. The first person to hold that job, Alexander Hamilton, said all of the following quotes except which one? A, power over a man's subsistence is power over his will. And if that's the right answer you think, it's GC 15-1A. B, great necessities call out great virtues. And that's GC 15-1B. You notice a certain symmetry here to the way these are numbered. C, learn to think continentally, which is GC 15-1C. D, those who stand for nothing fall for everything, GC 15-1D. And finally, E, it's not tyranny we desire, it's a just, limited federal government, GC 15-1E. Again, send the answer to 22333. I'm going to give you a minute more as more of these answers are coming in. Okay, they're all right, it looks like we have, now there's some more votes coming in. Give you another second or two. All right. Let's review those answers now. I think we've got enough votes in. And in looking at those answers, it's clear that most of you think Alexander Hamilton never said either learn to think continentally, which is 42% of you, and 25% think those who stand for nothing fall for everything. While there are 21% of you who think he said it's not tyranny we desire, it is a just, limited federal government. And wisely, only 4% of you said power over a man's subsistence is power over his will. And the little 8% number said great necessities call out great virtues. Okay, let's see what the answer really is. All right, that answer, great necessities call out great virtues, was actually by Abigail Adams, who wrote that in a letter to her son, John Quincy Adams. All right, you have just proven that you really need to have this session. So, to give you whatever to help you now to be able to keep that gray matter a little more stimulated so that by the time we get to a question tonight, you'll actually be able to answer it properly. Let's start our luncheon panel on the global economy. And we're delighted and honored to have a truly exceptional moderator for this wonderful group of former US Treasury Secretaries. Sheryl Sandberg, the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, founder of leanin.org, a global community committed to empowering women to achieve their ambitions, the author of the bestseller Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead, and before her role at Facebook, Sheryl was the Vice President of Global Online Sales and Operations at Google. We are delighted to have her, to have our panelists, and you're in for a very enjoyable hour. So here they are. Sheryl, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Great to have a chance to moderate this panel of three such extraordinary men. And there are so many wonderful things to say about all three of them, both professionally and personally. But there's one really surprising thing about them, which is they're not on Facebook. And so I have taken the liberty of helping them today, and it's my way of introductions. I hope.
No product placement.
Here we go. Our first panelist today is Bob Rubin. Bob Rubin was the 70th Secretary of the Treasury, served under President Clinton, the first NEC director the country ever had. Before that, he was co-chairman of Goldman Sachs, and now he serves as co-chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations and one of the founders of the Hamilton Project. Please join me in welcoming Bob.
Thank you.
Hank Paulson, you can see how great this would be for them, right? Hank Paulson, 74th Secretary of the United States Treasury, served under President Bush. Before that, also CEO of Goldman Sachs. He now chairs the Paulson Institute at the University of Chicago, which is a think and do tank. I like that language. And he has a new book out called Dealing with China, which just hit number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list for its debut placement. Thank you. And our third, Tim Geithner, the 75th Secretary of the US Treasury, served under President Obama. Now, you heard it here, folks, he never actually worked at Goldman Sachs. Never did. People think he did, but this may be why. He never actually did that. Bob has some views on why that he may choose to share later. But he was CEO of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Before that, he was a civil servant, a career civil servant at Treasury, and he is now president of Warburg Pincus. Please join me in welcoming our panel. So we're sitting here with 3 of the most experienced economic minds and decision makers, and that's a great honor for all of us. And we might as well start then with the economic outlook. I think it's fair to say that so far, 2015 may not be as promising as we might have hoped for growth. Certainly the outlook at the end of 2014 looked like it might be a little bit more optimistic. So let's start. Are we slowing down? Or as the current president of the New York Fed says, do we not yet know? Let's start. Bob, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think, Sheryl, if you go back 4 or 5 months ago, people thought the consensus was something like 3% growth. I think if you look in the last couple of months, most businesses seem to feel there's been some softening. But I don't actually agree with the way you framed this quite, with all due respect.
Please.
I think what we have is a continuation of a gradual, slow, and steady recovery. I think the unemployment rate is probably substantially in excess of the official unemployment rate. We have stagnant median real wages, and I think that's the kind of condition we're in, and so it'll go up and down a little bit within that range. I do think that just one other thing I'll say, Sheryl, I think there's some really substantial tail risks that the markets and the economy don't reflect. I have an office of the Council of Foreign Relations. When I'm over there, people are talking about all these geopolitical risks, and I think people really feel very deeply threatened. It's totally not in the market. And secondly, we all know there's been a tremendous amount of reaching for yield. The question is, has that created excesses or not? I don't know whether it has, but certainly that's a possibility, so that would be another tail risk that's not reflected. So I think we'll have a continuation. The most likely outcome is a continuation of sort of a gradual, slow recovery.
Hank, are we continuing a gradual slow recovery? Getting better, getting worse?
I agree, and I think it's been more or less bumping around 2% plus or minus. I happen to think the global slowdown, the slowdown in investment, strengthening dollar, probably provide more of a headwind than we get from the boost in the decline in oil prices. But again, I would echo what Bob says. I think there's some significant risks. But the good news is we've been more or less growing since 2%. Since the third quarter of 2009. We're a bright spot in the global economy. Housing prices are rising. We're not growing fast enough, and too many people are being left behind.
Tim, economic outlook?
Well, it's worth noting that none of us really know anything about the future, and we certainly don't know anything about how economies perform in the short term, even over the long run. And we live in a messy, dark, scary, uncertain world. But I think the economy is. But
that said, what was that? A scary, dark, uncertain world?
Yeah. I mean, that is the normal state of mankind. It's sort of sad to admit it, but it's true. But I think in that context, though, I do think the U.S. is gradually getting
slightly
stronger.
Less dark, slightly less scary.
And we're a lucky country, very resilient country, and I think a much stronger country than any other major economy. And if you look at the challenges we face as a country, they're pretty stark challenges, and our politics are terrible. But I think you'd rather have our challenges than the challenges of really, certainly any developed economy, and I think any major emerging market economy around the world.
So when you think about where we are, dark, where was it? Dark?
Messy, scary, dark, uncertain.
Or a continuation of a slow economic growth that's happened since 2009. How do you think about job creation? Do you feel that our economy continues to create jobs at the rate it possibly can? Is there something we should be doing to jumpstart it? Make it less dark and scary, messy?
Well, we're creating jobs and gradually getting closer to the point, although we're not there yet. I think Bob's right. Not at the point yet where we're fully using the tremendous human capital of this country. But we're getting closer, and we just need a longer period of growth above potential for that to happen. And we're still growing fast enough, even at this moderate pace, to gradually bring all those talented people back in the labor force where they can be used more productively.
So you feel that we're on the right path?
I think it's. I don't ever want to say that. you never want to look too optimistic. But
don't worry.
I feel like it's.
Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're worried Tim is too optimistic. Go ahead. Anyone? All right, you're safe there. Keep going.
But yeah, there's a lot.
You got pessimism covered.
Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of things we could be doing. Of course there is. I mean, if you could look at the American political system today and say that we're operating at the frontier of what's possible in terms of policy, no one believes that. There's no plausible way you can say that. So we're operating so far short of the frontier in terms of public policy that, marginal improvements in closing that gap would have really high returns.
Job creation. Are we doing enough? Will this slow and steady recovery give us enough job creation, or does something else need to be done?
I feel very strongly about that. I feel we're not growing fast enough, and the income disparity is a huge issue. And I think that the only solution to this, and there's no easy solution, are fundamental changes. That the world is changing quicker than our policies are changing, and we need the kinds of policies that will let us have a competitive economy going forward. I agree with Tim that we're a bright spot and we've got less challenges than any other major country. But as I look at the secular changes I see, and look at what's happening as a result of the digital revolution and technology, globalization, I think we need fundamentally different policies to grow quicker. We need a new tax system, we need entitlement reform, we need immigration reform. These are not easy things, but it's going to take our political system working better. So on the one hand, I am pleased with where we are now relative to where we were, but the kinds of changes I think to drive us forward are going to take fundamental reform.
Job creation.
Yeah, I guess I'd say two things, Cheryl, three things. One is I do think, as I said in my first comment, I think the unemployment rate may well be substantially in excess of the official rate. I agree with something Hank said. If we had effective policy today, I think it could make a very substantial difference in the short run, and I think it's absolutely critical for the long run. We have and I think this is in my opinion, the fundamental challenge for the future of our country, and that is reestablishing effective government today. It's a totally dysfunctional Congress, a total unwillingness to compromise across political and policy divides, and yet that's the only way our democracy can work. I'd add one more thing, if I may, Cheryl. Not necessarily looking at the moment, but looking out over time. I think the world that you're so much part of, which is the world of new technologies and artificial intelligence and all the rest of this, creates very real questions about what will pressures be on wage. On the one hand, it's a tremendously constructive force in terms of productivity and growth. And on the other hand, it may turn out to be highly labor displacing with respect to what are conventional middle-income jobs. And we could have a whole session just on how does one respond to that from a policy point of view. But I think it's a really serious longer-term issue for the country.
Yeah, so let's follow up on a bunch of the different things we mentioned. Let's start with income inequality.
Okay.
You're going to say yes, please.
So income inequality, this is something I think we've all thought about. You know, I was working on that topic when I was still at Goldman Sachs, and
in which direction?
Were you working on increasing it?
Yeah, make it wider.
But I think.
Yeah, but I would say.
I think Cheryl was approaching.
I think Tim just made up for his prior pessimism with humor. We appreciate that.
But in all seriousness, I looked at that as something that was a.
I was serious.
What was a huge issue, and so we talked with economists. You know, a matter of fact, with the current chairman of the Economic Advisors, Kruger, when he was at Princeton. And my first speech as Treasury Secretary was on that topic. Now, but I look at it, I'm going to come back to what Bob said. Of course, there's big debate in terms of what the driver is. And globalization is a force, but I think that what's going on right now with technology and the digital revolution is huge. I think it is the biggest economic trend in the world today, by far. And I think technology brings with it huge advantages for society overall, but the pace of change is so fast and so violent. And as I look at industry after industry, whether it's engineering, architecture, law, business, you see the middle being carved out. Anything that can be routinized is being routinized. So it's sort of a winner take all. And so, you know, you've got to ask yourself and say, you know, I have a belief that this is progress. You can't turn back the clock. Most of the new technologies I see are really much more about productivity, and I don't see them creating more new jobs than they're eliminating, but I'm sure there will be some. And so I think the key question is not, gee, is this happening? I think the key question is, what do you do about it? And there, you know, I'm not going to practice without a license and talk about training and education and so on, but I do believe the kinds of economic reforms I was talking about earlier will make a difference and help deal with the problem. But basically, and this is not just a U.S. problem. It's hard to think of a country that doesn't have it. So it's a global problem, and I don't think our democracies are going to work the way we need them to work if we don't deal with it. And it's just too easy for politicians to be populist and to look for scapegoats as opposed to dealing with a real problem.
So the two issues come together, right? The dysfunction that Bob talked about in ability to create policy that Tim mentioned. It's not possible to look at the situation and say, we are very well placed to handle serious economic challenges. Technological changes. What is possible to do? Or let me ask the question two ways. One, if you could pass the right policies, what would they be? And then two, what can we do? This is an amazing group of people of a lot of influence in a lot of industries. What can people do to create the political environment which would get us to the right policies? Tim, what are the right policies, and then how would we get there?
Well, it's not, these aren't challenges we're going to solve in one.
In the next 46 minutes?
No, I mean, there's no like simple, compelling, clean, easy set of things to these things. These are challenges for a generation or more, and they're going to take a long war. It'll be like the forever war in economic policy in this. But, I think you need to have a period where you have stronger economic growth relative to potential. It's hard to do much on these things without growth. It's very, very important to recognize at the beginning that fundamentally these outcomes for the low-income worker or even the median worker are hugely dependent on how fast we're able to grow. And part of this depends on our ability just to do a better job as a country at delivering the type of public goods only governments can deliver. And education is going to be fundamental to that. And of course, we know that that's a complicated, hard thing to do. So I would say, at the start, you have to recognize that designing policy to try to create more rapid growth, infrastructure is a good example of things that have good high returns in terms of growth and good high returns in terms of they're more employment intensive, and just trying to focus on some basic things that improve our capacity to equip people with the skills they need to compete in this world. That's a very hard thing to do, but again, we're not close to the frontier of what's possible in those areas, and I would focus on those things.
Bob?
Yeah, I'd give you two answers to two parts of it, Cheryl. I do think, and I said this before, I think the fundamental challenge for our country is having effective government. And I think you, as part of it, I'm not going to get invited to the next panel after I say what I'm about to say, but I think the social media plays an enormous role in public opinion. And I think it has become, to some extent at least, a conductor, if you will, of ideology and politics, an echo chamber. The converse would be if the social media could if those who had responsibility in the area of the social media, whoever they may be, could find a way to engage the American people in recognizing that we must have effective government, whatever your views may be on issues, and that we should insist that our elected leaders be committed to governance and to principled compromise to find common ground across divides. And I really do think this, I've thought a fair bit about this. I don't know much about social media. I don't even belong to Facebook, as you correctly pointed out. But I do think that properly used, there might really be a major role, constructive role, as opposed to the undermining role that to some extent maybe it plays now. In terms of policy itself, I think the single most important thing we could do would be to have a well-constructed fiscal policy, which on the one hand increased public investment in the short term and simultaneously enacted entitlement reform to put our entitlements on a sound financial footing and increased revenues. And then in addition to that, you do immigration reform and a whole bunch of other education. I believe we need to increase the minimum wage. I think we need to give workers an even playing field in terms of the right to decide on collective bargaining. I just think there's a whole lot we could do, but you can't do it without a political system that works.
So, yes, please.
Let me just say, in terms of the political system reflects the people, and our people are very divided. Country's polarized, and I think part of it, it's not just social media. It's we get our facts from different places. And people self-select. There's so many different cable channels, so many sources, and so I think that is a huge problem. But in addition to the policy moves that we need to make, and I think we'd all pretty much agree on the kinds of things, I think there's two other things that need to be done. I think the people sort of need to understand the facts and these changes. Because I do think even if we take all the policy steps that anyone could deem appropriate, the world is changing, and the sorts of jobs that were available, used to be available, aren't going to be available in the future. And I think that really means people changing some of their expectations, getting different types of training. I think one of the most disturbing things are the number of young people that aren't working or aren't happy with their jobs today. And
particularly globally.
Yeah.
The youth unemployment numbers globally are shocking and striking.
It really, really is. And so I think this is a global problem. And I don't think we're thinking big enough about it in terms of how to do it. People have done more work. The reason I said I didn't want to practice without a license, I really haven't done the work on what kind of universal service would be in the United States, or what we could do so that every young person had some kind of training and then some kind of follow-up training afterwards. But in any event, this is a huge problem, and I think it goes beyond just policy. the world is changing so fast. I think people's expectations need to change, and politicians who are just looking for scapegoats are just saying, well, it's the Republicans' fault, or it's the Democrats' fault, or it's Wall Street's fault, or it's this or it's that. You know, it just is an easy issue to demagogue, and it's a hard one to solve.
So let's talk a little.
Sure,
Yeah,
I
please.
just want to emphasize one thing that I think they both said. You know, this is not really a challenge of paucity of ideas. It's not as if we're short of good ideas for things that would help on these fronts. This is all about the craft of governing and how to help the American political system rediscover the capacity for principled, pragmatic compromise and the ability to actually do things. And in our political system, it's worth remembering that all power to affect really the path of the long-term growth of the American economy goes through the Congress. And you know, we didn't invest the chief executive of the United States with vast discretionary power to alter these incentives. And so, you know, if you're going to get better choices out of your government, you're going to have to raise the set of expectations you create for them in terms of their ability to do things. And you know, that's where we look so just appallingly disappointing today. But that's about, you know, rediscovering the ability to find some room for pragmatic, principled compromise. You know, something we seem to have lost.
Well, let's follow up on one of the issues you raised, one of the policies that everyone thinks, I think, is obvious, which is entitlement reform, and talk about how, right? I mean, it's impossible to look at the numbers and not decide that this country needs to do entitlement reform. You can decide we can do it in advance. You can decide we can wait till the next crisis or the inevitable entitlement crisis happens. So how? We're here, we are citizens. How do we hold our Congress, our elected members, responsible for getting to the pragmatic compromise we know we need?
You know, our system is sort of famously good in extremis, but not so good for the slow-burning, the kind of problem of rust where it accumulates, and that ability to bring the long-term forward. Doing that today, that's our big challenge. But you know, there's no way around it except to try to force people to confront those basic choices ahead, to recognize these things are unsustainable and unaffordable today, and it'll be easier to adjust to that new reality in entitlements if you start now. You don't defer it.
Entitlement reform. If you were sitting Treasury Secretary now, or you were about to become the new one for whoever gets elected, how?
Well, when I came to Washington, that was the reason I ultimately decided to come. Was to work on entitlement reform. As you know, I got to work on some other things, but it is, my own view is it's all about political reform, because, you know, if you look at the issues, Social Security is analytically simple. It's politically very complex. And even though healthcare reform is analytically complex and politically complex, it isn't that analytically simple, complex to do something better than we've got now, where there's some fundamental reform. I always thought we would ultimately extend the coverage to the uncovered, the 30 million. It never occurred to me we'd do it without getting fundamental reform. And so this is, I really believe that there's just so many people in America today that don't even know what their health care costs as long as the government's paying for it. And that is a system, no matter how much you trust regulation, it's really hard to have us deal with those costs. And it's all about generational equity and the future of our country. So again, I come back to what Bob said. It is about making the political system work. It takes leadership. It's got to come from the president. It's got to come, and our country doesn't deal as well with our political system, with as Tim says, big, complex, difficult issues if they're not immediate crises. But we'll figure it out. We've got to figure it out.
I don't know quite how to answer your question, Cheryl, because I sort of agree with everything that's been said. And I think it's even more complicated because there isn't a will right now for entitlement reform. In fact, there are many now who say we should increase Social Security benefits. And then when you ask them, well, how would you pay for it? It doesn't become part of the discussion. I think that as Hank said, if you could reform the healthcare system in such a way as to give us a healthcare as a percentage of GDP comparable to other countries, there'd be enormous savings to the federal government. But I think it comes back to making the political system work. And I'll come back to what I said before. I know I'm just repeating myself, but there's somebody who runs a very large think tank in Washington who had the idea of he and I going to somebody, which we did actually, and asked him to put up $500 million of his own money. It was his money, not ours, so it was easy to ask him. To see if there was some way to take the social media and create an interactivity so that the middle-income worker in the middle of the country would engage. It doesn't do good just to provide information. You have to get people to engage and try to engage people in the issues in the hopes that if you did that, then you could get a political environment that put pressure on politicians so they would change their calculus and would decide it was in their political interest to engage in compromise and reform. And I think that's the fundamental question.
So when we think about the the political environment we're operating in, it obviously poses huge challenges for seriousness of policy and execution domestically. But it's also challenging, I think, the United States' position in the global economic world. And it's a particularly interesting time to talk about that with the creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which I think when many of us were growing up and in the position the United States had in the global economy, it was kind of unthinkable, if you look back a certain number of years, that this could have gotten created against the wishes of the United States without the United States joining. Interesting article Jonathan Weissman wrote in the New York Times at the time of the IMF World Bank meetings 2 weeks ago. The United States government is so bitterly divided that it is on the verge of ceding the global economic stage it built at the end of World War II and has largely directed ever since. He then went on to quote the chief economic advisor to the government of India, talking about the US, who said, "It's almost handing over legitimacy to the rising powers, not so much by intent, but as a result of dysfunction and a lack of resources to project economic power the way it once did. Because of tight budgets and competing financial demands, the United States is less able to maintain its economic power, and because of political infighting, to the point that's made on this panel, it's been unable to formally share it either." So the question is, what is really happening for US in terms of maintaining global economic leadership? Is it really changing? And what, if anything, should the United States done? Does this matter? Does the United States economic leadership position, is it changing fundamentally? And will that matter?
Well, I do think we're at this point where, if you talk to people who run businesses around the world or invest around the world, there's a point where there is really a fair amount of confidence in the relative position of the American economy today. I really believe that. On the other hand, that exists with deep concern about what our political system has done for the capacity of the United States to support things like you referred to. And I think it's important to recognize that with this profound erosion of support in both parties, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, for the types of institutions globally and the types of foreign policies, international economic policies that were so central to the prosperity of the U.S. and the world in the many decades after World War II, with the deep erosion and support for those things, it is very, very hard for us to play that role. We have nothing like the freedom of maneuver in terms of resources, although we're a rich country, to deploy resources because Congress has to approve all that stuff. And the profound erosion in support for trade in both parties has made it much harder for us to credibly negotiate and deliver these things. And I think these things have very real costs. I think a lot of Americans tend to look at the world and say, maybe China is a deep threat to our economic interests, our security interests, or there's some other power out there that's somehow going to erode our relative position. I think it's important for Americans to understand that we're still a master of our fate in those things. And the biggest risks to our economic outcomes in the U.S. and the biggest risks to our relative position in the world are about Washington, our politics in Washington. And unless you can relax those constraints and try to rebuild that consensus, we will suffer a damaging and severe erosion in our capacity around the world to be a source of not just stability, but fairness, rules of the game, basic security for people.
So it is eroding and it matters.
It does matter, although, again, it's not like this is beyond us now. It's not beyond the point of no return. Still, in a relative sense, we're still the best source of trusted, respected, relatively neutral views on how to make the world work better in that sense. But ideas aren't enough. You have to be a source of ideas, but you have to be able to deliver. Unless we rediscover that capacity to deliver, the U.S. behind those things will suffer a meaningful erosion.
Could I add one thing?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
It's sort of the same thing Tim said, but said maybe just slightly differently. I'd rather invest in the United States than any other country in the world. We have tremendous comparative advantages when you look at the dynamism of our society, our flexible labor and capital markets, the rule of law, our demographics compared to China and Europe, and so vast natural resources and so much else. The problem is, as now we've all said now multiple times, is we've got to get our policy house in order for that, our political system to work. But I think we can continue to play a major role in global economic and geopolitical matters for a long, long time to come, hopefully in partnership with China, not in opposition to China. But it does come back to this question of getting our house in order. And I think the world needs America to be America again.
Why?
Because, Cheryl, without the United States, there is take geopolitical issues, for example. There really is nobody to play the role that the United States has played geopolitically for many, many decades now. And I think with respect to maintaining fair trading rules or opposing cyber appropriation, cyber theft, for a whole host of these kinds of issues, there is nobody who's going to play the role the United States has played. So the world really does need America to be America again, and we need America to be America again.
Role of America changing?
It's changing, but I tell you, anybody that's writing us off, and neither of my friends up here,
even the darkness over here didn't write us off,
are doing that because, as Tim said, we are by far the strongest economy, biggest economy in the world, and I don't see anyone out there that is going to overtake us as the predominant force in the world if we fix our problems and if we lead by example. And so it's sure the political system makes it difficult for us to do this today, but I think the sort of thing we need to do to show leadership is first, as everyone said, correct, have our own economy perform well, because who wants to follow, we have to be a good example, okay? And so it starts with what we do at home. And then secondly, showing leadership, economic leadership abroad. And take China as an example. Now, China got many more problems than we have to deal with. And so you can, as I've said over and over again, you can make as big a mistake exaggerating, overemphasizing China's strength as you can underestimating their potential. But they are engaged, and so they're building trade linkages all around the world, investment linkages. Now, we are better positioned to do that than the Chinese are. And we are better. And we can't be successful with 4% of the world's population if we're not looking to do business with the other 96%. And so, and I tend to be an optimist. Like, we've got to get the TPP done, Trans-Pacific Partnership. That would be huge to get that done. It'll also be huge if we don't, having said that we're going to get it done. So it's important in terms of being able to deliver on what we say and in terms of what it means to our economic strength. There's plenty that we can do. And and I'll tell you, this is not going to be a world that any of us are going to want to live in, even if we weren't living in the United States, if the United States doesn't continue to be a leader economically. So again, I just don't think there's a lot that can be done internationally without passing legislation. And to me, this is just being able to look beyond domestic politics, and because domestic politics never favors foreign investment. Domestic politics tends to be, or the popular opinion is nervous about foreign trade, nervous about foreign investment. But these are very, very beneficial, and it just takes, I think it's going to take strong leadership. But I think we all agree. So we're talking to ourselves. We could have a great.
And Michael Froman, who was Bob's chief of staff at Treasury, is in charge of the TPP legislation.
To me, he's just such a terrific bright spot. I mean, he's just going at it all the time, working on the bilateral investment treaty with China, with the TPP, with the European deal. And he's making progress, and fingers crossed, he'll get it done. we'll get trade promotion authority, and we'll get that done. If we get it done, we get a few wins. It's amazing how people will start looking at things differently.
That's right. So let's go to China, because if you're talking about the global economic environment, and your book, obviously brand new, I'm reading it, others should, it's fantastic. It is interesting both from a business side and a geopolitical side, and is incredibly well written. So congratulations. China is likely to surpass the United States as the world's largest economy. China is our biggest foreign creditor, owning over $1 trillion of Washington debt. How do you think the American people should be approaching the China-U.S. relationship? How do you think that relationship is changing, and what advice do you have for the right kind of engagement in China?
Read my book. No, seriously.
Or at least buy it.
I think.
Or at least buy it. That was Tim's joke. I don't want to take credit. That was good.
But in all seriousness, I wrote the book, Cheryl, because I think this is.
Well, there's an opportunity.
It's by far our most important bilateral relationship. So China has emerged as a formidable competitor, in addition to a partner, as we all know. And the relationship is much more complicated, given that they are more assertive now in foreign policy and given some of their economic success. But the way I look at it is it's very much in our interest to find those areas where we have a common interest. And there's many areas where we have a shared interest, and we're not going to make real headway globally unless we find ways to work with China. If we're looking at climate change and the environmental issues, I don't know how we solve them unless we're working with China. When you're looking at sustaining global economic growth, if we work in complementary ways, much easier, and our problems, economic problems, become easier to solve. If you're looking at stability, or global stability and peace, denuclearization, all easier if we're working with China. So as I see the world today, that it's more important than ever that we get important, tangible things done so both publics can see the value of the relationship, and that we don't let the competition devolve into debilitating competition. Competition isn't bad. We shouldn't be afraid of competition. China is using their trade and investment linkages to help achieve their economic and their national security ends. We can do likewise. And we need to be strategic about the way in which we're dealing with China. So again, I'm repeating what both Bob and Tim have said. If we aren't where we would like to be 20, 30 years from now, it's not going to be because China's the threat. It's going to be because we didn't fix our own problems. And in terms of, our borrowing from China, that we're a creditor to China. I get asked that question all the time. Aren't you concerned that the Chinese own so much of our debt? And I said, no, what I'm concerned is we have so much debt. That's my concern, because let me tell you, the Chinese are doing what's in their interest. That the money they've invested in our debt is a much bigger percentage of their foreign exchange reserves than it is of our debt. And if you're a Chinese investor, would you rather own a euro or a yen? I mean, give me a break. But I think what we need to do is to expand the investment linkages. That's why I'm so much for the bilateral investment treaty, because I believe that direct investment, Chinese investment in the U.S. that creates jobs, is a very strong linkage between our two countries. And I think the bilateral investment treaty will also help Chinese reformers open up big parts of their economy to competition from the private sector and from U.S. companies, which would be good. The last thing I would say, which I think people that have been reading the newspapers know, is we all know that economic growth in China is slowing. So we know that. What maybe less people have focused on is, just as we have these fundamental structural economic issues, they do. Their model, which had worked well for a long time, is running out of gas. They have some flawed policies that need to be fixed. They're building up too much municipal debt, using government investment in municipal debt
to drive growth. So they need to fix those problems, and I think that's going to be very important to them and to all of us in terms of how they deal with those.
China, anything to add? Too much fear, not enough cooperation? Other thoughts?
I think probably Hank has said it reasonably well.
Probably. Probably.
All right. So let's talk about women.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, no, let's talk about China.
One thing in praise of Hank. It's a very simple thing, but in these kind of questions, whether it was China or if you think about just come back to this basic craft of governing, a huge part of what matters is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of your counterpart, try to look at the world through their eyes, try to understand what is important to them, what is necessary, what do they fear, what do they hope for, and unless you're able to do that and make the effort to do that, you have no ability, no plausible chance of trying to negotiate something effectively in this kind of. And I think, Hank, you demonstrated, how high the return is in that kind of investment because you worked so hard over a long period of time to build trust with a bunch of people who were, no offense, unlikely to trust you as a capitalist from Goldman Sachs. I mean, you worked very hard to build that basis of trust, and I think that's fundamental to much of what's necessary.
I'd add one more thing, if I may. I was just thinking about Hank and I have written an article together. It'll come out the end of May on the United States-China relationship at The Atlantic magazine. There's a tremendous wariness about China in this country, as Hank has indicated. There's tremendous wariness in China about our country, when in fact, aside from the fact that a mutually effective relationship is a tremendous bilateral benefit to us for investment trade, there are all kinds of transnational issues like climate change, terrorism, pandemics, and so forth that no one country can deal with alone. But the United States and China together, given that the international institutions for the most part are weak and ineffective, is probably the best chance that the globe has of dealing with these issues because of the moral suasion that these two large economies could have if they work together. But somehow or other, Cheryl, there's got to be just a greatly increased awareness in this country, and I would say the same thing must be true in China, of the importance of having a constructive relationship as opposed to a counterproductive relationship.
Getting past the fear, which Hank has done so much on.
But the challenge, which we just have to just acknowledge, is there's few examples in history of having a major preeminent power and a rising power not ultimately come to conflict. And that's not inevitable. A matter of fact, it's far from inevitable, and I'm not predicting it, but it takes work. And the choices our policymakers make on both sides in terms of what the right mix of competition and cooperation is, and how we resolve some of these issues, and how we work to bring China into the rules-based system, but also recognize that they need to have a significant say in the system also going forward. And this is really, really important.
So return to women and their role in the U.S. economy. So I'm going to start with a Warren Buffett quote. And I'll preface this by saying that when Tim and I were younger versions of ourselves working in the U.S. Treasury, we once had to explain to Bob that Jimmy was not, in fact, Warren's son. But Warren Buffett...
Well, what happened was I saw Dick Armey, and I told him Warren Buffett's in favor of not reducing capital gains tax. He said, so what? Jimmy wants them reduced. I was going to say, who cares what Warren's son says? And then I found out who Jimmy Buffett was. When I came back, I saw President Clinton. I said, I called Alan Greenspan to see if he knew who Jimmy Buffett was. He didn't know either. And President Clinton looked at me and he said, why doesn't that surprise me?
So Warren Buffett has famously and generously said that one of the reasons he was so successful, he was only competing with half the population. So we know that gender gaps, both in workforce participation and leadership, are a drag on our productive capacity. The IMF put out a report recently saying that if women got to the same labor force participation as men, US GDP would increase by 5%, Japan by 9%, Egypt by 34%. Those are big numbers. 5% is a big number, as we discussed. And when women can't reach the highest leadership positions, and I know how hard this conference has worked just to get to 30%, so we're working hard to get 50% of the population to 30% participation in something like this. You know, when women can't get there, we're not using the productive capacity, and we're still using only part of our capacity. So what needs to get done? How do we get women to be full participants, both in the workforce and at the leadership levels?
Cheryl,
Anyone
I remember.
Can start.
Could I start out?
Yes.
Actually, I
please.
shouldn't. I don't want to start out on the subject. Somebody else start.
Tim.
Well, why? We should ask you this. I mean, really, why would
I'm
we have,
asking the
why would we have credibility relative to you?
If
We have to hire more women.
if he had the answer, he would have written the book.
We
Right?
have to hire more women. We have to promote more women. We have to pay them more fairly. It can't be rocket science.
Yet, yeah, that's right.
Well,
Yet very hard to do.
but very hard.
Very hard to do. Like a lot of the other questions we have, right? We know we need entitlement reform. We know we need. Hank, what should we do?
Yeah,
What do you think is important on women?
If someone had benefited by working with strong women throughout my career, and at the Paulson Institute, our executive directors are women, and most of the senior people are women. And I thought about it a lot. I think it's a difficult issue to deal with. The one thing I saw from my time at Goldman Sachs and working with a good number of clients, that even if men are doing their level best and don't believe they're biased in any way, when you're choosing between a couple of leaders, you tend to gravitate toward the one that's got the kinds of qualities you express. And so my own belief is what it takes a lot of push from the top down. It takes it from corporate boards, it takes the CEO, and I don't believe in quotas, but I think the CEO, man or woman, has got to put its finger on the scale, because I'm just totally convinced that's what it takes, and it's going to take also policies and programs that recognize that there are differences, and that there's a huge amount of advantages you get from having a diversity. I've thought a lot about leadership, and there's no great leader anywhere that doesn't have great people around him. Everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. Hank is candid, Hank is indiscreet, Hank is decisive, Hank doesn't think carefully enough before acting. So the ones.
Are you speaking of yourself in the third person?
Only briefly, and he's in the middle of such a good answer. We're going to let him have it.
Well, but so you need to have people around you that compensate for your weaknesses, and I watched that, and women really have some different characteristics, different leadership styles, different management styles. So there's huge advantage. But even if you think you're being totally egalitarian, it's based on merit. Often, if there's a group of men making a decision, they won't make the right decision. So I think I don't like when I look at what I read in Europe about quotas for boards and legal quotas. But I got to tell you, I think we're going to be heading in that direction if we're not more proactive and driving this. And there's huge advantages for driving it. It's not easy. If it were easy, it would have been done a long time ago.
I think that the most important part of the answer is, one, recognizing the biases, because that's where I think we have failed. And the second is understanding how important it is for companies, that it is a competitive advantage.
I think there's a more complicated problem, Cheryl. Years ago, you and I were talking on the phone, and you said to me that of the women who were in the top of your class at the Harvard Business School, and you were one of them, very few of them then went on and had active, full-time careers for the rest of their lives. I remember when I was at Goldman Sachs, and I've been involved with Harvard and, of course, the Treasury Department. I think on an entry-level basis, over time, the pools, men, women, sort of be roughly the same, a little different in field to field.
And then it narrows.
But then you have the problem, when you have kids, given the social norms with respect to kids, a lot of people are not willing, a lot of women have not wanted anymore to engage in 10, 12 hours, 6-day-a-week kind of jobs, which is sort of the world that I lived in. And the result is that they opt out of the kind of intense full-time activity that leads them to then be in positions of leadership that you're talking about. So I think it's a much more complicated question than we've just suggested. And I don't know, do you change those norms? You can get all kinds of questions about that. Child care is a policy that would help, but I think it's sort of, it's a policy.
Leave policies.
Yeah, you can try up ramps and
really
down ramps. You can have flexible labor hours. But I'll tell you something, Cheryl, and I know the politically correct things to say in response to this. I could have a conversation and come out with everybody clapping if I wanted to. But But I think it's very complicated, and I've lived through the up ramp, down ramp. You have flexible labor hours, but the client wants you on the phone at 11 o'clock at night. So I think it's easy to say these things, and I think it's very, very hard to do. I think there is immense advantage to a society in having women fully engaged in the workforce, but I think it's far more difficult than we're making it out to be. Now, in countries away from the United States, you have cultural issues, you have legal issues, you have all kinds of other issues that go way beyond the issues that we face.
And yet many do better than we do.
Hey, Bob, I just would just say one thing, because everything Bob said I agree with. We've all lived it, okay? So my only point wasn't that it was going to be easy and we're going to deal away with it, but at least what I saw at Goldman Sachs, when you have the women that want to keep working, okay, and then I think it's just very important early on to make sure that they have every advantage and they get the opportunities to keep going. There'll be certain jobs and certain careers are harder than others, but I think you can move the needle if you do some things earlier on. I think it's very difficult.
A lot more to do. All right, let's talk climate change. Bob, we're going to start with you. You've called it the existential threat of our time. Again, political challenges on both sides, but what are the most important steps we need to take, and do you think this is cast appropriately enough as an economic issue?
I'll tell you what I've come to believe, Cheryl, and it just largely started with the conversation I used to have with Tom Steyer. But then Hank, Mike Bloomberg, and Tom Steyer started something called Risky Business. I've been part of that. And what it basically, I'll do this very brief. What it basically did was to analyze the effects that climate change will have on our country, region by region, sector by sector. And I've come to the conclusion personally that, and if you look at this study, you see it in the study, that the most likely case is first serious and then severe adverse impacts, and realistic possibilities of results multiples worse than that, so we have catastrophic effects on life on Earth as we know it. And I think it is a desperate problem. I talked to Tom Steyer about it this morning, actually. I think it's a desperate problem. I think a lot of people in a room like this will agree, but they haven't internalized the urgency and the cataclysmic effects that can occur from not dealing with it. And I think what we need is what Hank wrote in his op-ed. I think we need to have a price on carbon. And I think we also need to have the research and pilot projects and policy framework that will encourage non-carbon-based sources of energy.
Yeah, Bob said it very well. I just, the only thing I would add to that, we talked about how the governments work better on problems when there's immediate crisis. Unlike a financial crisis, this is very vicious because it's cumulative, and it does, the longer you wait, it really it takes away your ability to avoid the worst outcomes. Governments do better if it's done on a national basis rather than a global. So this is global, and it's longer term, but we still got time to act and avoid the worst outcomes. Bob has emphasized something that he didn't mention here, that when I'm talking to Republican colleagues, I talk about. And I think this is very important. There's a part of this is, what's already baked in the cake that we know is coming, or is very likely to come. And then, of course, we're trying to avoid the worst outcomes. Bob has pointed out that all those that, are opposing a solution because it involves big government are ultimately setting themselves up to have the government play a bigger role and for a huge fiscal problem. Because what happens, think about it for a minute, whenever there's a climate-related disaster, whether it's a forest fire, a drought, a flood, a hurricane, you name it, it hits one geographical region, one industry particularly hard. Government comes in, and that's what we expect our government to do. There's a big cost to that, and then it's a fiscal cost, and we all pay. So Bob has pointed out, and I thought a really good Washington Post editorial, is a big fiscal problem. And I think a lot of the resistance comes from climate based upon people not wanting the government to play a bigger role and not trusting the government. And what the Risky Business study does, which is it doesn't recommend the policy solution. It just looks at the problem using risk-based analysis, and it's bipartisan. George Shultz is a member. We've got Republicans, Democrats, business people. And if you just go and sit down with communities
and talk about let's just look at a range of possibilities in terms of the economic impact, you meet people at the middle. And groups that normally are, opposed, if you say, we've got a big climate problem and you're part of the problem and we want you to pay, and that they're deniers. But if you start talking about here are the range of economic risks to you and your community, they suddenly are all ears.
I can't improve on that. I'm just saying that, it's hard when the cause is in dispute. I mean, it's hard enough when the means we have to help ameliorate the problem are controversial, which is true in this case, but the fundamental cause still is in dispute. And so you got to start with that, and then you try to figure out a way to get people more to understand that the costs of change now are much lower than the costs of change later. And again, in our political system, that's just the hardest thing. I mean, in economic policy, most of things that are good policy are going to be deeply unpopular with large segments of the political spectrum. And the capacity to bridge that, to act in the face of that is the hardest thing, for political systems.
So the lights are shining. We have 5 minutes left, so I'll ask you for, this could be long answers, but we'll ask you for the short version. You all served, all three of you, as Treasury Secretary during really challenging times for our country. Across the board, globally, domestically, what's the most important thing you learned as Treasury Secretary? And Tim wrote a great book with a lot of things he learned, also worth reading, as did Bob. Seriously, these are great contributions to the public understanding. Tim, I
think I learned that you can't approach these jobs as if your task, your challenge is to optimize within the constraints you're given. Because you can't do much for the economy of the world within the constraints you're given. You got to figure out a way to relax those constraints, to expand the scope of what's possible. And you can't do that without a combination of good ideas, being willing to be for stuff, and without some capacity to figure out how to bring people together in support of those things, which is about negotiating and about governance and about compromise.
Great answer.
You need those things.
Hank, what'd you learn? What's the most important thing?
Well, I think most people think, gee, the Treasury Secretary is a very powerful position. But as a Treasury Secretary, unless you have the support of the President and or are able to work with Congress or with foreign governments or with regulators don't work for you, you have to, again, you have to engender their support. And so the thing that I learned was that it takes maybe the same skill set as in business, but a very different mindset. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to compromise. There's not a lot of room for ideologues if you're going to get something done. So it really comes down to people issues. It's much more people than analytical.
Bob?
I was just thinking of something. I'm deciding whether I want to say it or not.
Then you should definitely say it.
If our mutual friend Larry Summers, who we are both very fond of, were here, he would say that the most important thing I learned was to call him and ask him what to do.
All right.
Now, having said that, I think two things strike me, Cheryl. One is know what you know, but know what you don't know. And for me, being at the Treasury was and in White House before that, enormous learning experience with respect to process and policy. And secondly, be true to yourself. Whatever it is you think, it's your responsibility to say to the President of the United States what you think, whether he or she agrees with you or not. And that is, the temptation not to do that is enormous. But you need to be true to yourself.
So we're going to do something called a lightning round. These are short answers. You get a word, a phrase, no longer, right? Gonna go down, go back, ready?
Good luck with that.
No, it's going to work. It's going to work.
You got the wrong group.
Ready?
If you start with Hank, you'll never get to us.
No, we start to my left.
Start with you. We're going to start with you and you're going to show them how it's done. One word, one phrase. Ready? If you could make one change in U.S. policy unilaterally, one topic, what would it be? One change.
Fixing our retirement system, because that will save our future.
Go. He did it.
Fiscal policy and measures that make government work more effectively.
One change.
I try to get more Americans to want to work for their country.
Okay. Put your forecasting hats on. When will the Fed first raise rates? Oh, I have a work it. You can pass.
When they think it makes sense.
Oh. Hank, do better, do better.
If you ask an English major, I'll say early next year.
Bob.
I think I'm going to sort of say another version of what Tim said. I don't think it matters when they raise rates. I think what matters is they do it at the right time in terms of economic circumstances, and I think it's going to be very difficult.
All right, all right. This goes against the lightning round. Ready? One word. Who is our biggest global economic competitor?
Ourselves.
Yeah.
I agree.
I concur.
All right, look at that. What will be the #1 issue in the 2016 presidential campaign? One issue.
Oh, I'm the wrong person. I defer to them.
One issue.
Income disparity.
That's an interesting question. I would say a variant of what Hank said, but mine's a better version.
Yet longer.
I'd say stagnant median real wages.
All right. Last book you read?
I read a lot, Cheryl. I'm reading 3 books right now. The last living eunuch in China, which I bought in Beijing. It's actually a very interesting book. It is.
Lightning round.
Oh,
It's a
wait a
list
minute.
of
Okay. Political Education by Harry McPherson, and a book called A Pound of Paper, which is about book collecting.
Last book you read, not your own, because you wrote that.
Innovators by Walter Isaacson.
Last book you read?
Last nonfiction book was Hank's book.
Any book.
Which is a great
Hank's book. All right. What's your newest piece of technology?
Oh.
Come on. Dig deep.
What was the question?
Any piece of technology. Hank, any technology, anything?
Well, to
anything?
Me, the iPad.
The iPad?
What was the question, Cheryl? I didn't hear the question.
What's your newest piece of technology?
A ballpoint pen. You don't have to.
All right. All right. Most important issue people are not talking about.
I think we were vastly under talking about climate change.
Hank.
Yeah, I think that.
And us getting to our plane on time.
I know the spirit. You got to stick with the lightning round.
I'll go with climate change.
I think we're talking about everything. We're just not doing much.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Bob, this is for you. Are you still walking around the office with your socks on?
Yes, because it's comfortable, and when a client comes in, I quickly put my shoes on before he sees it.
Yes. Tim, you claim to have started this trend. Was Bob copying you?
No, I suspect he was first, but I admired that custom.
Hank, any special sock behavior you want to share with this audience?
Sock behavior? I just only holes in the sock.
There you go. All right. I hope you can answer this. I really do. iPhone or Android?
What?
Well, hold on. State it again. What?
iPhone or Android?
Oh, iPhone.
iPhone.
BlackBerry.
Most economically literate president?
Well, I only knew a few presidents, but I think President Clinton was massively illiterate. Massively literate economically.
Most economically literate president?
George W. Bush.
All right. And you're going to say?
Oh, I'd say it had to be Obama or Clinton.
Absolutely. All right. Paper or Kindle? Reading books on paper or Kindle?
Paper.
Paper.
Kindle.
Kindle.
News online or on paper?
Mostly online.
Which is that?
Both.
News.
News online or on paper?
Both.
Both.
Both. Last question. What do you do to relax?
To relax?
To relax.
So you do the same thing I do.
Yeah. Fly fishing.
Absolutely. Saltwater. I'll be fishing for tarpon next week.
But I really do it well.
He may cast better, but I catch more fish. He takes a long time. I get it out quick.
Tim, last word.
I do that too, but I read.
You read. Thank you all. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.